Welcome back to the Astronomical Learners YouTube channel. So today I wanted to know if you know the history of reading, or if you'd like to know how I interpret the history of reading. If so, stay tuned.
All right, so what has been my experience? If you watched my last video, you learned a little bit about me that I learned to read in 1998 with public school phonics. Unfortunately, my daughter did not get that same experience in 2021, so I learned how about reading and structured literacy and became a parent advocate. So, to go back, and this is a little review, but why is reading so important? That's because if you know how to read, that you become one of these people that love reading, you get practice, you develop automaticity, and reading is almost effortless. So again, what happens if you don't learn to read? There's no enjoyment in reading. You don't get the practice. You don't get the automaticity. Reading's unpleasant, and you usually don't have fun at school. So when it comes to the history of reading, I want to go way back. So first of all, remember the human brain is wired for language. And so first actually came storytelling. So the oldest known cave painting is actually found in Spain, and storytelling originates with cave painting. So verbally, humans would tell stories and we'd make art to relay the images to convey that message. Now, when it comes to reading, writing actually comes first. So first we have pottery that was invented. There were these little clay tokens that were used to record specific amounts of livestock or commodities. These are the ancient Sumerians who developed cuneiform, and it was a way to record transactions. So originally, writing and reading had nothing to do with stories. It was about money. Then we have cuneiform. It's the earliest known writing system, and it's developed again for economic purposes, and it's in modern day Iraq. So the first story that we know of is the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the first story we've found so far. So it's the first ever official book, but of course it's carved into a stone tablet. Then we have the Egyptians who developed papyrus, which is what we consider pages, but it's actually weaving together of plant stems. And then we also have the Greeks and Romans who invented wax tablets. So if your child uses a technology version of a tablet today, you are harking back to what the Greeks used. So they'd actually put beeswax in, heat them up to erase them, and reuse them over and over. But also this is related to the Latin language. So if you know English or Spanish or French or Italian, these are Indo-European languages, and they're all related. This is called the Romance family, and that's why they are related to each other. So we are all related to this Proto-Indo-European history. So that's why I want to preference this video by saying every language with an alphabet has an alphabetic code. Now, when you're talking about pictographs or a lithographic language, they do memorize their characters, but it's because they have a different type of alphabet. So when we're talking about English, we're talking about the English alphabet. So, with that being said, we need to talk about the printing press and early books. So actually, before the printing press, we have in China monks that made books with blocks, wooden blocks, and this printing set is what is the prerequisite before the Gutenberg printing press, which happened in 1440, which is really what people spark as the European model of why we have so many books today. Now, I want you to also point out that if your kid has a tablet, it's also a reference to history because kids used to learn to read and write with horn books. So they were a commonplace teaching tool, and we have evidence as far back as 1450. The problem is they were used so much, they disintegrated. But you see here, they have like kind of an abacus at the top, and then you have a manuscript right here that was transparent, so you could slide something in, kind of like a dry erase sheet that we have today, and then children could copy. So here's another example. This is actually made from bone. So this is what would be carved into it. And then you would get a temporary sheet on top of it. And then your child would transcribe it. So again, when we talk about early books, we want to talk about primers. So this is the New England Primer, and it was published in 1690, and it was the first teaching, technically textbook that we had in the USA. Then I want you, because I'm going to be using some in, well, I use it in my homeschool, I use it in tutoring, but I do love flashcards, so I'll be making some flashcard videos. But not many people know the mother of flashcards, which is Favell Lee Mortimer, and she used flashcards to help students grasp the phonics concepts more quickly. Then we have McGuffey Eclectic Readers. These were also kind of delving into the instruction, but really it was up to the person who purchased the book whether you wanted to use the phonics method or a whole word method or a combination of the two. And the main problem of using these today is most religious homeschools can use them without any issues. But if you are a secular homeschool or if you are a secular teacher in the USA in public schools, it has a lot of religious undertones that aren't as relevant as today. So also, I'm going to be also making a video explaining how I taught my kids to read, but I want to point out the father of phonics first. So there's a lot of people that will tell you need to learn the sounds first or the letters first, but this Professor John Zachos, who's actually a Greek immigrant, taught enslaved adults and even poor adults in the 1800s. And it was used in Boston to teach new Irish and German immigrants to read the English language. And this provided a strong foundation for not just children, but also adults. So what is his method? His method, and you can find his books free online, are number one, teachers explicitly teach the alphabet letter names first. Number two, teach upper and lowercase letters. Three, teach single letter sounds. Four, teach double letter sounds. Five, teach all the 44 phonemes. And then six, teach the correct pronunciation of the words, which in the UK, they incorporate them in their education development as called oracy. So this is where we get the problem of whole language. So there are a few people that were very well-meaning. There is one guy who observed his child kind of pick up words from a newspaper, and they just assumed that kids learn to read by osmosis. But the person who implemented it into the American education the most is this man, Horace Mann. So he became the father of American public schools. He visited Europe, and what he saw and his observations, he had his own confirmation bias. So he saw how Germany was teaching reading from the bottom up approach, which is letters and sounds were learned before the words. Well, that was in America. And then in Germany, he saw the top down approach where the words were learned first. So he believed that this whole word method was the best way to teach reading, and this is what welcomed the reading wars in America. So the problem was that even in Boston, where we know Professor Zachos was teaching, primary teachers have used phonics for several years, as far as they could. The problem was they were given an unphonic spelling book, which they had a manual for, and the book originated from Horace Mann. He's the one who argued against phonics and other methods in favor for this whole word method. So the main problem is that Horace Mann had misread the situation. He was mistaken with the correlation for causation, and this set off the slow motion disaster for what we see today as functional illiteracy. So he confused the American authoritarian style of teaching with the phonics method, and he assumed teaching of reading according to the whole word or picture method was a kind and gentle teaching style. So this is the person or the methodology that he observed, which is Gestalt psychology. Gestalt means whole. So for the 1920s, this is John Dewey. He brought in progressivism, which came to dominate the nation's schools, and it was aligned with this whole word approach. So it was also called Look and Say. This was produced by a publishing company who made Dick and Jane readers, and they were developed for Scott Forsman Publishing. So a lot of these publishing companies, you'll recognize names because they also still publish whole language literature today. So what's the problem with Dick and Jane books? And, at first glance, you think, oh, it's just, repetitive. That's really good for young readers, right? Well, not quite. So you see it has short little words, but they don't always follow a scope and sequence. It's kind of very random. And then the problem is when you turn the page, you can go from this very short section to a very long section and then back to just 3 words on a page. And you see it's mostly pictures. So, who discovered this was a problem? Well, there were rumblings, but it really came to a head in 1955 when Rudolf Flesch published his expose, Why Johnny Can't Read. So he was a tutor and he was a teacher, and he actually went to Columbia College, so he knew exactly what the teachers were being taught. But he was an immigrant himself, so he knew the opposite way to teach English as well. And he concluded that this whole word or look and say method was ineffective because it lacked phonics training. He was critical of these simple stories and limited text and vocabulary in these Dick and Jane books. He also believed that the look and say method did not properly prepare students for comprehension or reading materials and upper grade levels when it comes to shifting from reading to learn to learning to read. So when you look at Cat in the Hat and you see a lot of phonics supporters support Dr. Seuss, you want to understand why. This is because after reading Rudolf Flesch's book, the creator of Dr. Seuss had an editor at his publishing company contact him and challenge him to write a story using only words that first graders could recognize or sound out. These are decodable words or rhyming words. So the result was Cat in the Hat. So cat is a CBC word, hat is a CBC word. The, in, and the are what we know as high frequency words. So the result was this book, and it sold really well, and that's where you have in the 1960s a bigger debate about how to teach reading. So this brings in Jan Chall. So she was a well-established reading researcher, and she was hired by Carnegie Corporation of New York to figure out what was right, because there was a lot of people just kind of doing what they were taught in a tradition style. There was no real research behind why people felt a certain way, either about whole language or phonics. So she developed the stages of reading development. So she found out that stage 0 is actually pre-reading, that is birth to kindergarten, which my other video I showed you, that's when our brain has no connections to reading whatsoever. And so at this age, you develop pre-literacy skills. Then stage 1 happens from first to second grade. This is where students need to be explicitly taught the basic skills necessary for reading, which is phonemic awareness and letter-sound correspondence. They start to decode basic words like the Cat in the Hat book. Then stage 2 is from second to third grade. This is where you develop confirmation, fluency, and you're ungluing from that print. So the children start to build that automaticity through practice. Stage 3 is reading for learning the new, which is grades 4 through 8. So this is where that shift happens, where you're no longer supposed to be learning to read, you're actually supposed to be applying what you're reading to your learning. And then your final stage is stage 4, which is high school into college or your job or vocational and beyond. And that's where readers actually engage with a wide range of texts and viewpoints. So back to my other video, when we say that people who are functionally illiterate, that means they're in between the grades of 0 to third grade. When you are functionally a little bit literate and you can't read beyond a 6th grade level, that's when you're still in that reading, applying your reading to learning skills. And then apparently we have a small group of adults in the United States today that are even in this stage 4 level. So what does this look like in a public or private school or a homeschool? Well, there are a lot of schools that are implementing this. An example is Massachusetts. This is their structured literacy development plan. So in general, you start in pre-K here and you have your print concepts, phonological awareness, letter names, and you're working on it right here. Then you move up from kindergarten all the way to third grade. So the goal is to have most mastery to third grade, but even some people are championing to continue even to 5th grade. Because maybe a student has more background knowledge or not everybody got the same repetition or some people need more repetition. It all depends on your student. So when we talk about Jan Chall, you want to understand that a lot of her work influenced early PBS Kids shows. So if your parents grew up watching The Electric Company, or if you grew up watching Sesame Street, or if you even watched In Between the Lions, these are important shows that incorporated literacy into them, and it's thanks to her research. So her studies actually found that the beginning readers over decades clearly supported decoding. What is decoding? It's right here in this poster, and this is from TeachStarter. So if you get stuck on a word, you look through the whole word from left to right, because that's how we read in the English language. You can use your finger or anything to segment the words into sounds, syllables, or chunks. Then you blend the sounds and you link the letter strings. And then you can listen to your own voice, slow your thoughts, think about that word, and always ask for help if you don't know. But when you're breaking down the letters and the phonemes and you're putting them together to make a word, that is decoding. And she found that this code emphasis was especially effective for children of lower socioeconomic status who are not likely to live in homes surrounded with books or adults who actively decoded in their presence. So what happened? The short answer is greed, financial interests. But you want to know a few of these names. So there's a man called Ken Goodman in 1967. He was kind of the direct opposite of Jean Chall, and he was promoting this idea of a guessing game. Then there's also Frank Smith, and his book for teachers, he supported and encouraged Goodman's guesswork technique for poor readers. And there are researchers that found that they had developed a model of reading that followed the exact paradigm of what a poor reader looked like. So they appealed directly to teachers. They wanted to ignore the gurus, ignore the experts. They wanted people to not trust their intuition, and they wanted to carry out their own research. That's when they also kind of caught the eye of Mari Clay, who is a New Zealand educator who praised and popularized the whole language approach. She created reading recovery in 1995, which was brought to America by Fountas and Pinnell. So this took hold in Ohio, and Ohio State University is just now kind of reaching their reckoning with it. Fountas and Pinnell also published books by Heinemann, which is a publishing company. They published their Leveled Literacy Interventions, which has no actual scientific background. So if you see like a book set in your child's classroom that has letters on it and there's a leveled literacy intervention, that's actually not based on science, it's just something they made up. So it looks like this. There's also Units of Study by Lucy Calkins. These are made up. They made a product to sell, and it sold really well because they appealed with their sales mentality to teachers directly, and they wanted to foster this love of learning and this literacy-rich classroom, but they ignored the science. So when we talk about Lucy Calkins, she's since been removed from the New York City schools and removed from Columbia College, but she has been undergoing her own rebrand for years now. Her most recent one I checked was called Mossflower. So I'm not the only one talking about this. This was actually documented in a podcast called Sold a Story. It's been documented on several articles. You can Google it. You can research it yourself. But essentially, if you want to learn more about the science of reading or what science actually says, stay tuned because I'm going to be posting another video and it's called What is the Science of Reading? But thank you for watching.